Good day, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back again to my virtual classroom. And before I continue my discussion, so I have here exercise 1.2. So what you need to do is to answer this and submit this in your on your LMS. So without much further ado, let us now start with the continuation of our discussion. So at this point, we're going to discuss about sources of historical data. Okay, so historical data are sourced from artifacts that have been left by the past, actually past. These artifacts can either be relics or remains or the testimonies of witnesses to the past. Thus, historical sources are those materials from which the historians construct meaning. This only means na history is being written based on the artifacts which has been left, or these artifacts are remains and testimonies and witnesses of the past. So, historical sources are those materials from which the historians construct meaning. So, they re-articulate it and this becomes a source. So, a source is an object from the past or testimony concerning the past on which historians depends to create their own depiction of the past. Example, um, in the cave of, halimbawa sa kuweba may nahanap na isang peraso ng gamit na pangkatay o kaya naman kutsilyo o kaya naman bato na ginagamit nila sa kanilang pang-araw-araw na buhay. So this remains becomes the source of interpretation. Okay, testimony of the past na merong nabuhay doon sa kuweba na yon. A historical work or interpretation is thus the result of such depiction. So the source provides evidence about the existence of the event. So as I've mentioned, so say for example, the materials found or the bones, okay, found, it depicts that there's an existence of a particular event in the past. And the historical interpretation in an argument of the event. Okay, so that is what we mean by historical data. So now, what do we mean by relics or remains? So we're talking about this uh, always. So when we speak of relics, say and or remains, so this existence offers researchers a clue about the past. So for example, the relics of remains of a prehistoric settlement. Okay, artifacts can be found. Our relics of human happenings can be found. For example, a potsherd or a potsherd, a coin, a ruin, a manuscript, a book, a portrait, a stamp, a piece of wreckage, a strand of hair, or other archaeological or anthropological remains. This object, however, never happening or this object, however, if this never happens, so they may be the results of other records of events. So sometimes these relics are being scrutinized or being studied. Okay, whether artifacts or documents, they are materials out of which history may be written. So that is according to Howell and Prevenier 2001. So ang ibig lang sabihin nito, these materials are the source of history. And because of these materials, history may be written. Okay. Another one is testimonies or witnesses. Testimonies, whether it's oral or written. Pag sinabing oral, verbal. Okay, or written naman ay nakasulat. May have been created to serve a record or they might have been created for some purpose. So all this describe an event such as the records of a property exchange, speeches, and commentaries. So this could be a source of history. So therefore, the historians now deals with the dynamic or genetic. Pag sinabing genetic, the becoming, as well as the static. Pag sinabi namang static, the being, and aims at being interpretative. Pag sinabing interpretative, explaining why and how things happen and interrelated. And as well as descriptive. Pag sinabi namang descriptive, telling what happened, when and where, and who took part. So, I'll repeat. So, the historian deals with the dynamic or genetic as well as the static and aims at being interpretative as well as descriptive. So, besides the descriptive data, as can be described direct and immediately from surviving artifacts, are only small part of the periods to which then belongs. So, ibig sabihin, a historical context can be given to them if only they can be placed in human setting. And the lives of human being can be assumed from the retrieved artifacts. Ang ibig sabihin ng the lives of human being can be assumed from the retrieved artifacts. So na-assume na merong human activity that time because of these artifacts. Okay? But without further evidence, so the human context of these artifacts can never be recaptured or any degree of certainty. Do not pumapasok yung limitation of history which I already discussed last time. Okay? So, we have written sources of history. So, written sources are usually categorized in three ways. So, number one, narrative or literary. Number two, diplomatic or juridical. And number three, social documents. So, let us differentiate or let us discuss one by one these categories or these three ways of um, on categorizing sources of history, specifically narrative history. Okay, so narrative or literatures are chronicles or tracts presented in narrative form. Kaya nga narrative. Okay, presented in narrative form, written to impart a message whose motives for their composition vary widely. For example, a scientific tract is typically composed in order to inform contemporaries or succeeding generation. Or a newspaper article might be intended to shape opinion. The so-called ego document or personal narrative such as diary or memoir might be composed in order to persuade readers of the justice of the author's action. That's why one of the activities that I am telling you to do is the weekly reaction paper, okay, from a newspaper, because whatever written in the newspaper will become history in the future, will become history. Okay, so a novel or film might be made to entertain, to deliver a moral teaching, or to further religious cause. But of course, most of the movies also depicts history. A biography might be written in praise of the subject's worth and achievements. And a narrative source is therefore broader than what is usually considered fiction. Siyempre, pag sinabing history, hindi naman talaga fiction yan. Okay, that is according to Howell and Prevenier again. So that's narrative or literature. So that's the written pa lang yan, written sources of history. And then we have number two, which is seldom being discussed in um, readings in Philippine history, is diplomatic sources. So ano naman itong diplomatic sources? These are understood to be those which document, record, or record of an existing legal situation or create new one. And it in this kind of source that professional historians once treated as the purest and the best source. Okay, example of the classic diplomatic source is the charter, which is a legal document or a legal instrument, or constitution. Okay, so a legal document um, is usually sealed or authenticated to provide evidence that a legal transaction has been completed and can be used as evidence in a judicial proceeding in case of dispute. Okay? So scholars differentiate this or discuss this as this legal instrument issued by public authorities such as like the King of Popes, the Supreme Court of the Philippines, and the Philippine Congress, from those involving only private parties. So this tells us that these are all legal instruments, specifically if these are issued by public authorities. Okay? That's why in our history, these legal documents are being attached or uh, being captured or being preserved. Okay, so diplomatic sources usually possesses specific formal properties such as hand and print style. So the ink na ginamit, the seal na ginamit for external properties and rhetorical devices, and of course, images for internal properties, which are determined by the norms of laws and by tradition. So such characters are also vary in time. So each generation has its own norms. Yeah, really, because time changes. And according to origin, each bureaucracy has its own tradition. Of course, the legal documents before is really different from now. Okay? So that's the number two, written documents or written sources. Okay, diplomatic sources. And of course, number three is the social documents. Ano naman pong social documents? So pag sinabi nating social documents, these are information pertaining to economic, to social, to political, or judicial significance. Examples are records kept by bureaucracies. A few examples are government reports. Ayan, such as ano tong mga government municipal accounts, research findings. Kaya nga yung mga thesis ninyo ay isang a source of history. Okay, research findings and of course documents like parliamentary procedures, mga civil registry records, property registers and records of census or of course the statistics records. So that those are social documents at nakapaloob yan sa written. Okay? Papaloob yan sa written. Ano naman itong mga non-written sources of history? So kung merong written, meron namang non-written sources of history. So wala pa nga tayo sa primary and secondary. So non-written sources of history. So unwritten sources are essential as written sources. So ibig sabihin they are equally important. There are two types. Merong material evidence and merong oral evidence. Okay, so those are the written sources. Material evidence are also known as archaeological evidence. Yung mga nahuhukay na hahanap ng mga archaeologists. And this archaeological evidences is one of the most important unwritten evidence. This includes, kasama dito yung mga artistic creation, such as pottery, okay, mga jewelry, dwellings, grave churches, roads, and others that tell us a story about the past. So, ulitin ko, itong mga material evidence na to, ito yung mga artistic creation like pottery, jewelry, dwellings, grave churches, roads, and others that tell a story about the past. And these artifacts, guys, can tell a great deal about the ways of life of the people in the past. And also, it shares or they share their culture. Okay, because of these artifacts, this material evidence, we know o nalalaman natin yung kanilang kultura. Also, uh, these artifacts reveal a great deal about their socio-cultural interconnections. Okay, of the different groups of people, especially when an object is unearthed in more one place. Ano ibig sabihin unearthed in more one place? Nahanap sa iba't ibang lugar. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, nagkakaroon ng movement, nagkakaroon ng interaction. Okay? Also, commercial exchange. Also be revealed. Okay, because of these artifacts in different places. O, diba, alam naman natin yung barter before. Okay? Pero nung mga primitive days pa, paano ang commercial exchange? Even places that are thought to be significant like yung mga basurahan, yung mga garbage pits, can provide valuable information to historians because this can be traces of a previous settlement. Ito yung mga pits na to, mga tapunan. So this can provide historians with information of a previous settlement or primitive settlement. And sometimes, archaeological sites that are of interest to historians are also unearthed. And during excavations, yung mga paghuhukay nila, example for roads, for sewer lines, and big building structures, merong accidentally may nahuhukay. Okay. Known historical sites are purposely excavated. Yung mga alam na historical sites, purposely, hinuhukay talaga to kasi baka merong mahanap. Okay, pero yung mga hindi siya popular at hindi alam na meron palang nangyari doon. Those are accidental. And with the hope of course, reconstructing and understanding their past or the meaningful past, shall I say. So, moreover, archaeological finds like coins or monies can provide historians with significant information relating to government transactions during which the currencies were in circulations. So similarly, these historians can get substantial information from drawings, etchings, paintings, films, and photographs. And these are the visual representation of the past. So I hope you are getting across now and you are now understanding the sources. Okay, these are the representation, visual representation now of the past. Kaya lahat ng itong mga ebidensya na to ay naitatago. Okay? Tinatago nila sa isang lugar na kung saan hindi agad masisira itong mga evidences na to. Okay? And of course, kung meron tayong unwritten evidence, meron ding oral. Okay, oral evidence. Okay, anong oral evidence? Ang oral evidence naman is important source of information for historians also. Okay, much are told by the tales, yung mga kwento-kwento, or kwento ng ancient peoples, like folk songs, mga folklores, mga kwentong bayan, or popular rituals from the premodern period of Philippine history. And during the present age, interviews are another major form of oral evidence. So, like kong binibigyan ng example, halimbawa, you are looking for, you want to write about Second World War, and it happens that the grandfather of Juan de la Cruz is still alive. So, and if you want to interview the grandfather of Juan de la Cruz, that particular interview is an example of oral evidence. Okay? So, I hope you are learning. Okay, let's proceed. Now, let's differentiate primary and secondary sources. Okay? So there are two general kinds of historical source. So direct or primary. The other term for primary is direct. And of course, we have the indirect or the secondary source of history. Okay, let's discuss first primary source. Kaya nga tinawag siya na primary source kasi first hand. Okay, first hand. Original. Okay? So this is a first hand account of an event or a period that are usually written or made during or close to the event or period. So this sources are original and factual. Okay? So, not interpretive. It's factual. So, their key function is to provide facts. Okay? So, di ba meron tayong two types of history, meron factual history and the other one. So, examples of primary sources, ito na yung mga samples ng primary sources. Diaries, you take note of this. Diaries, we have journal, letters, newspaper, and magazine articles, government records, what else? Ano to mga government records? Na-discuss ko na sa inyo to. Mga legal documents, photographs, maps, postcard, posters, recorded or transcribed speeches, interviews with participants or witnesses, interviews with people who lived during a certain time, songs, play, novels, stories, paintings, drawings, and sculpture. But these are all original, first hand, hindi to photocopy. Okay, kasi pag photocopy na at nailagay na yan sa libro, that is no longer a primary source. Dapat original, first hand. Okay, so that's primary source. So what about secondary source? On the other hand, these materials made by people long after the events being described had taken place to provide valuable interpretation of historical events. So therefore, a secondary source analyzes and interprets primary source. Kapag inanalyze na at ininterpret na yung primary source, it's already second or secondary source. Secondary source now becomes an interpretation. So that's why it is an interpretation of second-hand account of a historical event. Examples of secondary sources are biographies, histories, o mga history books, literacy criticisms, books written by a third party about historical event, art and theater reviews, newspaper, or journal articles that interpret history. Okay, that is now secondary source. Okay, I hope that's clear. Okay, so before I end the discussion about the sources, I have here again an exercise 1.3. So you answer this, and you have to just answer this without copying the question. So answers only, and also answer exercise 1.4. Okay, so I hope you learned something today. Thank you so much for listening. So don't forget, please also subscribe to this channel. So if you want more videos, if you want to be updated of video lessons regarding readings and Philippine history. So thank you so much, guys. Goodbye, and I hope you learned something today.